Mara stepped out of the taxi, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Blackwood Hall loomed ahead, its ancient brick facade casting long shadows in the setting sun. It was her first day in this new city, and she was here to start her bachelor's degree. The dorm, with its Gothic architecture and ivy-covered walls, seemed both welcoming and intimidating. As she walked inside, the bustling activity of students moving in created a lively atmosphere. The first few months at Blackwood Hall were a whirlwind of classes, new friendships, and the excitement of university life. Mara found her room easily a small but cozy space on the third floor. She quickly became friends with her roommates and a few neighbors. The dorm was full of life, laughter, and the camaraderie of shared late-night study sessions and weekend outings. Mara thrived academically and socially, immersing herself in her studies and making the most of her new environment. The historic charm of Blackwood Hall, with its creaky floors and antique furniture, added to the experience. She heard stories from seniors about the hall's haunted past, but dismissed them as mere folklore meant to scare freshmen. As Thanksgiving approached, excitement buzzed through the dorm. Most students planned to go home for the break, eager to reunite with their families and enjoy the holiday. Mara, however, chose to stay behind. The thought of returning to her mother and stepfather was unappealing. Her stepfather had moved in after her father's untimely death, and Mara had never warmed to him. By Wednesday afternoon, the dorm had emptied out. The once lively halls were now eerily silent. Mara felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She appreciated the quiet, but couldn't shake the feeling of being alone in the vast, ancient building. Wednesday night was peaceful. Mara enjoyed the solitude, catching up on reading and indulging in some solitary relaxation. Around midnight, she decided to take a shower before bed. The bathroom was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. As she walked, she heard a faint, muffled sobbing. She froze, listening intently, but the sound ceased. Shaking off the unease, she continued. The bathroom lights flickered as she entered, and the temperature seemed to drop suddenly. Mara turned on the shower and tried to relax, but the lights went out completely. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to see. The door slammed shut, and she heard the distinct sound of the lock clicking. Panic surged through her as the tap water turned scalding hot, steam filling the room. She banged on the door, shouting for help, but her cries were swallowed by the oppressive silence. After what felt like an eternity, the door unlocked on its own. Shaking, Mara grabbed her towel and fled back to her room, her heart racing. Mara spent Thursday on edge, jumping at every little noise. By evening, her nerves were frayed. She resolved to stay in her room all night, not daring to venture out. As midnight approached, she needed to use the bathroom but was too terrified to go. Her bladder ached, but fear held her hostage. Around 2 a.m., she heard it again, the soft, mournful sobbing. It was closer now, emanating from the hallway. She crept to her door and peeked out through the small window. At the far end of the corridor, illuminated by the pale moonlight streaming through a window, she saw a figure, a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her long hair matted and covering her face. The ghostly woman sat on the floor, hugging her knees and weeping uncontrollably. Mara's breath caught in her throat. The ghost lifted her head, revealing hollow, dark eyes that seemed to bore into Mara's soul. The entity's mouth twisted into a ghastly smile before letting out a blood-curdling scream. Mara slammed her door shut, backing away until she hit the opposite wall, her entire body trembling. Sleep eluded Mara that night. She sat on her bed, knees drawn to her chest, rocking back and forth as dawn's light crept into her room. She spent Friday trying to research the history of Blackwood Hall, desperate for answers, but found nothing significant. By nightfall, her fear had grown into a gnawing dread. As the clock struck midnight, the laughter began. It was a low, sinister chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Mara pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound grew louder, more deranged. There was a sudden, violent knocking at her door, causing her to shriek in terror. "Go away," she screamed, her voice breaking. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of whispering, unintelligible but filled with malice. Mara cowered under her blanket, praying for it to end. She could feel the presence of the ghost, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to seep through the walls. Mara was losing her grip on reality. She hadn't slept properly in days, and the constant fear was wearing her down. She avoided the bathroom entirely, using a bucket in her room instead. Her reflection in the mirror showed a pale, gaunt face with dark circles under hollow eyes. That night, as she brushed her teeth, the mirror fogged up despite the room being cold. Words began to appear, as if written by an invisible hand. "Leave now." Mara dropped her toothbrush, stumbling backward. The lights flickered, and the ghost appeared behind a reflection, its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. Mara spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The lights went out again, and she ran back to her room, slamming the door shut. Mara could no longer distinguish between night and day, her mind teetering on the edge of sanity. She spent Saturday in a haze, unable to focus on anything. As night fell, she fortified her room, blocking the door with furniture and clutching a flashlight in her shaking hands. The ghost's torment reached its peak. The laughter, sobbing, and whispers blended into a cacophony of horror. The temperature dropped so low her breath came out in white puffs. The lights in her room flickered, casting long, ominous shadows. Then came the knocking, louder and more insistent than before. Mara held her breath, tears streaming down her face. The ghostly figure materialized in the corner of her room, its dark eyes fixed on her. It moved closer, its feet not touching the ground, gliding silently towards her. "Please," Mara whispered, "leave me alone." The ghost's face contorted with rage, and it lunged at her, stopping just inches from her face. Mara screamed, the sound raw and primal. The ghost dissipated, leaving her in utter darkness and silence. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. When the students finally returned from their Thanksgiving break, they found Mara huddled in a corner of her room, rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. The dorm was abuzz with rumors of what had happened. Some claimed to have seen the ghost themselves, while others dismissed it as hysteria. Mara was taken to the hospital, her mind shattered by the relentless torment. Blackwood Hall was closed for investigations, and the students were relocated. The legend of the ghost, a vengeful spirit of a woman who had died tragically within its walls, became a permanent part of the dorm's history. Mara never returned to Blackwood Hall. Her encounter left her scarred, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows. The haunting of Blackwood Hall became a cautionary tale for those who dared to stay alone during the festival, a story whispered in hushed tones, ensuring that the ghost's legacy lived on.